Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of breaking news this morning to get to. Some new indications about just how the politics of Roe being overturned might play out. We've got some data for you there. Also, big primary results in Ohio. We have J.D. Vance winning the Republican Senate primary, Nina Turner losing her race against incumbent Shontel Brown. So we'll break all of that down for you. The Fed making some big moves, and actually the market very relieved at some of Jerome Powell's comments, sort of reining in and limiting his indications of what the Fed is going to do going forward. So we'll talk about that. New union busting efforts from Starbucks' returned CEO, Howard Schultz. This is actually completely outrageous and probably illegal. They're going to lift wages and benefits, but only for the non-union Starbucks workers.
Wow.
So
I can't believe it's real.
Seriously, I mean, it really is probably illegal. So we'll see what the NLRB ultimately does with it. We also have Christian Smalls, of course, the president of the Amazon Labor Union, at the White House today, meeting with Kamala Harris and also with Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, and testifying on Capitol Hill in front of the Senate Budget Committee. I know he's going to be urging them to fully fund the NLRB. That's something that is, I mean, it's insane that this agency just doesn't even have the funds to do the basics of what it is supposed to be doing. Also, some new and revised takes on horse medicines.
Some horse medicines are allowed, apparently.
We're going to update you on all the latest in veterinarian care. So, you know, important story to bring to you this morning. We're also happy to be joined by Kyle Kondik, who, of course, a great political analyst. He will break, and he's really been tracking the rightward shift in Ohio. So he'll get into all the numbers, which we're excited about as well. But we wanted to start with some early indications of how the politics of Roe versus Wade being overturned might ultimately play out. And Saagar, you found this. I thought this was very interesting. Go ahead and put this first piece up on the screen here. So Politico had a big report kind of diving into this. The headline for their article was Democrats are skeptical that SCOTUS will ultimately save them in November. And one of the things they point to here is the fact that the day after Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, Democratic donors poured more than $30 million into Democratic campaigns and groups through Act Blue, so highly motivated by that situation. However, in the 23 hours after the draft SCOTUS opinion, Act Blue took in just $9 million. It wasn't updated, it's actually $12 million, but still sufficient, you know, significantly less than the $30 million after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And Saagar, you know, for Democrats, like, what case can you really make that things are going to be different if you elect them again when people already elected you in part on a promise that you would codify Roe versus Wade and protect them against this outcome? So it's like, return us to power because we promise this time we'll do the thing that we refuse to do right now and we didn't do last time. It's just not that much of a compelling case, to be honest with you.
Oh, and things are really expensive and we're not doing anything about that.
Well, there's that too. I mean, and that's the thing is like, I do think that, so my analysis at this point, which can always change and, you know, to take a million caveats, whatever, and there's a long time between now and November, is the election's still going to be on the economy.
100%.
It's still going to be on inflation. It's still going to be on the fact that people, there were some new economic numbers that came out that were in terms of how people feel about the economy from CNN. It was like 70% feel terrible about the economy.
And blame Biden specifically.
Yes, and there's a lot of blame on the Biden administration. That's what this election is ultimately going to turn on. Now, at the margins, do I think this decision could make a difference? Yes. And I also think that, you know, it creates a difficult rhetorical landscape for Republicans. So it creates more risks that you have like Todd Aiken type moments and candidates that just say something that is completely sort of abhorrent and outrageous and end up, you know, setting themselves on fire. But overall, do I think it totally upends the wisdom of this election and like hands it to Democrats? No, I think it probably is ultimately going to be a relatively marginal impact that still has some benefits for Democrats, but overall doesn't really change the game.
I think that's right. Also, I do want to say on the numbers, which is that, look, $12 million is still a lot of money. Sure. And what I'm interested also in is this. Right now, the story is, well, they've ruled it privately. Maybe, we don't know. It could change. Who is the leaker? Eventually, when's the decision coming out? You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, like we report it as it is. We try to give everybody the facts, but it's still not definitive. And we're going to have months before this happens. I would describe it this way.
They did confirm that it's an authentic draft.
That's right. It's confirmed an authentic draft. However, it's not the actual final ruling. It doesn't actually change the law of the land currently as we speak. So it activates probably the most hardcore people. Imagine trying to explain this to a normal person. You're like, oh, there's a leaked person And, there are 5 people, maybe votes. And you're like, wait, what? Do you mean, is it there or is it not there? Like, what's the law? So that complication doesn't make it definitive. And so there still could be a possible backlash. But I would describe it this way. I think ours were cruising to like an R+7 victory with a massive amount of previously unactivated or even Democrats coming in and voting with a referendum on COVID, on the economy, and, to a limited extent, political correctness. Now, this just has a lot of uncertainty. And this is reflected really in the Senate Republican talking points. Let's put this up there on the screen. Axios got their hands on this. So what are they talking about? Well, they are maximizing their message whenever it comes to the leaking. So what they say is this, and I find this very interesting too. If they have to discuss abortion, they say this specifically. Be the compassionate consensus builder on abortion policy. While many people have different views on abortions, Americans are compassionate people who want to welcome a new baby into the world. Expose the Democrats for the extreme views that they hold. Biden have extreme and radical views on abortion. Finally, and this I think is probably the most important, forcefully refute Democratic lies regarding GOP positions on abortion and women's health care, adding that Republicans do not want to take away contraception, mammograms, female health care, or throw doctors and women in jail. So they're trying very specifically to try to isolate the fringe movements within the pro-life consensus, I guess you could say.
I just have to nitpick on that. We don't want to throw women and doctors in jail. In Texas, there was literally a woman who was indicted in March after she miscarried. They ultimately dropped the charges.
I was going to say, I think the charges.
What happened was she told staff at a hospital in Texas that she had tried to induce her own abortion, ultimately miscarried. Okay. And they indicted her. I mean, they did, they were going to charge her and then they ultimately dropped the charges. But I mean, it's definitely the case in Texas, if not the women being criminalized, certainly the doctors are being criminalized. Anyway, all of this is a long way of saying that I think what you're pointing to is it is now going to be very difficult for Republicans to not be the extremists in this debate and appear to be the extremists in this debate because Roe being overturned is out of step with majority opinion, and polls sort of consistently show that. So it used to be the case that effectively everything was going the GOP way. Certainly the economy,
that's what I mean.
And I still think that's the number one issue. It's typically the number one issue. When people feel like they're struggling, they're unable to put food up, that's what's weighing on them day in and day out, and that they're thinking about when they go to bed at night and when they wake up in the morning. But it used to be that they had that going for them, and they were kind of, had the upper hand in terms of the cultural conversation.
Yes, exactly.
Now it's a mixed bag, because this is certainly going to be the dominant cultural issue and conversation between now and November. And you can tell that they know it's a difficult one for them because, and this has been the strangeness of this whole situation, they just got word that they're about to achieve their goal of 50 years, this long quested after major accomplishment of a significant part of the Republican movement. And they don't seem that happy about it. Instead, they're like, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the leak.
Yes.
It's a literal insurrection and it's actual terrorism and it's actual violence. That is a tell that they don't think this conversation about the actual substance of what is happening here is beneficial for them politically. They would rather not talk about that and fixate on, maybe some woke kid leaked this and we're mad about it.
Yeah, and we saw that reflected by Jenna Ellis. You guys might remember her. She was part of the Giuliani, what were they called exactly? The really Class A team that was in charge of the Stop the Steal movement under the Trump campaign.
Was she appeared at the Four Seasons landscaping press conference? That was a real high point.
She was certainly involved in some of the most embarrassing and ridiculous moments of the final days of the Trump administration. And she appeared on Newsmax with exactly this line. Let's take a listen.
All about Democrats just want America the way they want it, and they don't care who they have to hurt and punish in the way. And so what nobody's saying about this isn't just an act of civil disobedience. This is an actual insurrection. We want to talk about January 6th. That's completely different. This is something that is actually trying on purpose to undermine the rule of law.
This is a literal insurrection.
I saw insinuations that whoever this person is should be jailed by the FBI. Look, I mean, the Chief Justice has ordered the Marshal of the Supreme Court. By the way, that is a real person. For those of you who know the meme about the Marshal of the Supreme Court, and this goes back to Luis Mensch back in 2017.
Is this what MTG meant by martial law?
That's right. I forgot.
MARSHALL.
So there's a Marshal of the Supreme Court. They have been order to have an investigation, but by all accounts, beyond, getting fired, it doesn't appear to be a federal crime in terms of what has happened here.
Like,
that's also quite odd.
Was illegal. It was just, this is their norms. And so suddenly there's oh my God, breaking the norms. It's a literal insurrection.
I think breaking the norms is bad. We disagreed on that, but listen, it's not a crime. Good. I mean, when we were talking about crimes and using this type of rhetoric, then I just think it's a little bit ridiculous. And by the way, you and I were also against a lot of the most maximalist, ridiculous rhetoric whenever it came to January 6th. We're like, yeah, it's a crime in order to just, go inside the Capitol. You could be prosecuted for that. But trying to throw like terrorism and all that stuff on some of these people was completely ridiculous. Anyway, the whole point is that rhetorical escalation on the part of the Republicans talking about the leak probably not going to work. And it really just opened the question here around what do Americans actually think about Roe versus Wade specifically? So obviously it just happened in terms of this news, but we have a snapshot view into YouGov America and their latest poll. Let's put this up there on the screen. What's very interesting is that there actually was a high perception, including shared by us, that Roe versus Wade was likely to be overturned. However, that increased even more so after the SCOTUS draft leak. Now, in terms of what Americans think about this, here's what they said. Overall, 70% of Americans said there was a 50-50 chance that the ruling would be overturned. Most Americans said, whenever it came to the overturning themselves, that they do not want the Supreme Court to overturn its Roe versus Wade decision. So this is U.S. adult citizens overall, not by party. 32%, yes, we would like to see it. 23%, not sure. 45%, no, I would not like to see it. Now, amongst Democrats, in terms of who would like to see it overturned, it's 22%, 28% amongst independents, 57% amongst Republicans. In terms of people who don't want to see it overturned, it's 64% Democrat, 47% independent, 24% Republican. So what I always point to is with the Democrat and the Republican number, that's obviously going to be skewed. But the winner in American politics is always who is more directionally aligned with the independents. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I mean, there's no question about it. The independent number almost exactly matches the overall U.S. adult figure and is more than double of the Republicans who don't want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. So I would just say that it's very clear here that this is an area where the independents will be more aligned with the Democratic Party messaging. However, the question in politics is also salience. On the day of the election, what do you care about most? Now, look, you can say maybe it's material politics. I don't know about that. I honestly, looking back at the 2020 election, what are some of the top reasons that people voted for Trump? Yeah, some people said the economy. But if you really dig down into it, a lot of it was cultural messaging, Krystal. And I think a lot of Republicans, people on the right, I realized that very quickly after the election results. I was like, oh, a lot of this doesn't really have to do with macro conditions at all. It has a lot to do with more like a referendum on political correctness and culture. Well, that can flip around on you if you appear to be the one who is more culturally extreme on the day of the election. How will that play out in November? I don't know. But by that time, Roe is probably not going to be law of the land, Krystal. We will have, Alabama laws and Georgia laws possibly.
It'll
be
more
others
real.
With outright bans. So not just, 6 weeks or even exceptions in the case of the life of the mother. There are probably some southern states out there which will have straight up bans which will dominate the news cycle at that time. Or maybe they'll have a state legislature, that is meeting to do something like that. You just have to try and imagine what's a news cycle going to look like on November 2022. And with this, it just injects uncertainty into the system.
Well, because all you need, and we've seen this here to some extent, but we've also seen it around the world, is some situation where, a horrific, unjust situation, a 15-year-old forced to bear her rapist baby who's her stepdad. I mean, something that
you see
is
this stuff in like the Middle East or
even in Poland, there was an outrage over, women who died unnecessarily because of extraordinarily restrictive abortion laws. So, there's going to be a lot of potential dangers for Republicans going forward, both in terms of what they say about this and just in terms of what people realize reality looks like when you no longer have the protections of Roe versus Wade. So I think that is well said. Look, again, ultimately, do I think this is going to be the number one issue in the election? No. But, in midterms also, unlike presidential elections, it really matters who's animated. Mm-hmm. And that has been the other thing Democrats have really suffered from is their base is not animated at all. And why should they be? Because they elected these people to do some things and they've done like nothing. So of course they're like, why am I going to bother to show up for you again? This could animate some of the Democratic base. It could sway some independents, again, I think on the margins. And as you point out, I think that's a good point, very much depending on if there is some particular outrageous event that really galvanizes public opinion against this decision, then, that does create kind of a wild card situation. So, it makes the landscape a lot more chaotic, a lot less certain than it was before. The overall dynamics and trends are still probably in the Republicans' favor, but maybe instead of a complete historic blowout where they end up with the largest majorities that they've had in decades and decades, maybe instead it's like we kind of eke out a win in the House, we kind of eke out wins in the Senate, and it's not quite as definitive.
I'd put it this way. You went from an almost guaranteed R+50 victory to possibly R+25 in the House specifically, in terms of the majority. And in the Senate, maybe it costs you 1 seat, maybe 2. Again, you have no idea yet how this is going to play out. So we'll see.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.